I'm a ghost. I don't exist. You cannot tell your editors who I am because I could lose my visa over this.
You discovered that they were essentially paying for stories so that they could kill those stories on behalf of some powerful figures.
The big political story was Trump and the other one was Weinstein, and those are the ones that they were catching kills. Friends would just say, this is a crazy conspiracy, you think that there's some kind of scheme. And guess what? Fear is one hell of a motivator. I mean, I came back and I was crying in the shower. Yeah, I was a mess. Do something you love. Just go off and fucking do something you love. And I fucking love what I do every day. I used to live just a block from here, and this neighborhood has changed dramatically, but this bar hasn't. And I still come here, although I live, a few more blocks away in the village. But this was a media, and still is a media hangout. So I've had many a fun night here with hacks that and even some flacks as well.
Flacks drink booze.
Hacks and flacks, it's a good combination. And this place, it really, just looking around the taxidermy and everything, it hasn't changed even in the 15 years I've lived in New York. And any time I'm sort of around this hood, this is one of my go-tos.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you chose it. I have been here before. It's an awesome place and the perfect setting for an Australian New Zealander dialogue, I believe.
So what are we drinking?
I'll drink whatever you're drinking. That's basically the rule.
Deal. Can I please have, Maureen, a dirty martini, kettle dry, no vermouth? Just olives dirty, thank you.
I'll do the same thing, please. Yep. Lachlan Cartwright, Australian.
Aussie.
You're a news hound. You're a scoop getter. You're a newsbreaker. And you're a tabloid journalist of sorts.
Allegedly.
Yeah, but cut from the cloth of this old school type of reporter. And that's kind of special in today's world because lots of people are just random opinionators and mouthers off.
No, look, I'm an old school, news hound.
Yeah.
Some would say a muckraker.
Muckraker,
that's right. I spend a lot of time meeting and greeting and ingratiating and sourcing.
Yeah.
Because I always say I'm only as good as my sources, and that's how I get scoops, is being out and about, going out into the world and finding out new information, and then coming back, standing it up, tapping it up, and as we would say, putting it in the paper, which is now a newsletter.
We know each other as well, pretty well. I should fully disclose that for the last year I've been writing a column.
Hamish's Hot Sauce.
Hamish's Hot Sauce.
The must-read column every other Tuesday in Breaker. I was totally crestfallen the other day when you decided to hang up your pen and paper because you're writing a book.
That's
but
right.
No, it's been a real treat to have you in the Breaker newsletter the last several months.
Very nice, Lachlan, and of course Breaker. The preeminent media newsletter covering New York media and beyond. So it was always a privilege to be in there. And I always thought of it, not quite as a column, but like a paragraph or a tweet, which is perfect for the amount of time.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, my friend.
Thank you, yes. But yeah, the book sort of took me away from it. But just putting that disclosure on the table in the interest of good journalistic ethics, which is something that you're very concerned about and have a storied history in, because one of the highlights of your career,
or lowlights,
depending on how you look at it, was writing this cover story for New York Times Magazine about Catch and Kill, which was, in short, I'm going to try and summarize it here. This is going to be impossible, and so I'll just draw it out of you in chunks. You were an editor at the National Enquirer.
I was the executive editor.
Sorry, sir.
Well, I mean, it helps put into to context.
The top editor at the National Enquirer.
I was the number two, the editor-in-chief.
This is good. Yeah. Thanks. That's good editing. So the number two editor at the National Enquirer, a major tabloid newspaper, and through your work there, you discovered that they were essentially paying for stories so that they could kill those stories on behalf of some powerful figures. Donald Trump.
Correct.
Harvey Weinstein.
That's correct.
Tell me, what was it like to write that story and have it out in the world? Because it was complicated and it involved so much personal stuff and was like a big risk for your journalism career, I believe.
And legally a big risk, because I was under, and still am under, a non-disclosure agreement. Mate, that piece was easily the hardest piece I've ever had to write, and it wasn't fun to write it. It's fun now to have written it and to talk about it. But I remember being at the ASMEs, the magazine awards, and it was right around the time that the indictment had come down against Donald Trump, the hush money.
So it's 2023, right?
Indictment. It's around 2023, yes. And I saw Jake, the editor of the Times magazine there, and I just thought, the news gods have kind of made this moment happen, that the indictment's come down. I've been sitting on this cracking yarn for several years since I left American Media, and I just went up to him. I didn't know him. I said, "G'day, mate. I think I've got a cracking yarn," and he just won a bunch of awards. So he was, he'd had a couple of maybe one of the things that we're about to have, and he said, "Well, let's follow up and we'll meet about it." So we have this meeting. They assign an editor, Willie Staley, who's absolutely brilliant, and I sit down to write it, and I thought, I can't fucking do this. Like I was getting out, old files, and I was looking through text messages to recreate scenes. And as I write about in the piece, my father died suddenly during when all of this was happening, and I just thought, I can't go over this stuff again. It's just
for emotional reasons.
It's just too much for me. And I thought, I don't think I can write this. And for months, I just couldn't get anything on the page.
I see you're working on this for months.
Correct. It actually took me a year to write. And I went to a party that Graydon Carter had at the Waverley. I think it was an airmail book party. And I just hear this, "Where's my piece? Where's my piece?" And it was actually a party for a book about the Times, the history of the Times. And so there were all the mastheads there, and I hear this, "Where's my piece? Where's my piece?" And there's Caroline Ryan over there. And I thought, that's Jake. And I turn around and I said, "Mate, I don't think I can do this."
You should say Jake's last name.
Jake Silverstein, the editor of the Times Magazine. And he was brilliant about it. He just said, "No, we're going to be able to figure this out." And I sat down with Willie, and he just said, "Why don't we do this in chapters? And why don't you write this? You're good at writing your column, your newsletter. Why don't we write this in chapters?" And so
you were at the Daily Beast writing media newsletter at that time.
At that moment, I was, yeah. And so, and they kindly let me do this for the Times Magazine. I needed to be a magazine piece. It needed to have the infrastructure of the editors and the fact checkers and the lawyers, because again, I'm under this NDA, which we'll come to, I'm sure. And so I finally kind of had the confidence, knowing that I didn't have to file, 10,000 words. I just had to file a chapter at a time, and Willie would read them and give me, feedback in real time. And I sat down and I wrote the first chapter, and I thought, okay, I might be able to do this. And I got the bloody thing done around Christmas of that year. And then it went through the machinery of the Times, which is sort of the Mossad of fact checkers.
They translate it into German first, then into Italian, and then back to English.
I mean, it's fascinating. They actually go through and they graph by graph by graph, will give you the colonoscopy of fact checking, and they call everyone and they re-report basically the entire piece out. But it took a year for that whole piece to come together, and it's easily one of the proudest moments I've had when it did finally publish and the whole story was out there.
You were privy to some of this more seedy underbelly of tabloid reporting and the machine there at National Enquirer, and in particular with this catch and kill scheme. Can you explain for the average person what that actually looks like, what it means?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a term I was familiar with when I took the gig to be the executive editor of the National Enquirer. Some context, Dylan Howard, who was the editor, a fellow Aussie, I would catch up with him, we would swap tips, stuff that he couldn't use.
Before joining the Enquirer?
Before joining the Enquirer.
What were you doing at that point?
At that point, I was with the Daily News, and I was working on a column called Confidential, which meant...
The New York Daily News.
Correct. And we were actually in the same building as American Media. The Daily News was on, I think, the 7th floor, and AMI was on the second and third
American
floor.
Media is the owner of the National Enquirer.
Is the parent company of, or was the parent company of the Enquirer. They then became A360 and the parent company of the Enquirer. And, Dylan was, someone who I would, have a bevy with. And I'd say, I've just been out chasing Charlie Sheen as I was at the New York Post and when he trashed the Plaza Hotel. And I've got Sheen's cell here, and it's not much use to me anymore because I've moved on to the next yarn. Here's Charlie Sheen's cell. And he smartly worked out if you text Charlie Sheen in the middle of the night, he'll text you back.
I remember that.
And well, maybe not now. I think he's sober now. But back then he would. And so, we would trade tips and trade intel. And then it was bizarrely Philip Seymour Hoffman that kind of got me into this position, because when he OD'd and was found in Bethune Street, the Metro editor came across to where I was at on the Confidential column and said, we're trying to find this bloke, Ian Barr Katz, he's a playwright, but they needed someone to try and contact him. And they thought, okay, we'll ask the bloke on the showbiz desk. And a few days later, the Enquirer came up with a screaming cover that it was like Philip Seymour Hoffman's secret lover tells all. I was freebasing coke off his ass in the hours before he died.
To be clear, you're quoting the story here.
I'm quoting the story.
You weren't doing that.
No, I'm quoting the story.
Look at these martinis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maureen.
Yeah.
Cheers.
By the way, this is kind of a noisy bar, I should mention, so that people are going to get the full New York experience. There's a lot of
sirens and trains.
We're next to the subway.
Yeah.
It's just not just us that are producing the noise here, but that's part of the show.
So the Inquirer have this screaming cover, and I just remember thinking, like, firstly, how the fuck did they get that bloke? And why is this bloke saying this crazy stuff about his best mate? Surely he'd be in mourning. Well, it turns out they did interview David Barkatz. It was a different David Barkatz. It was a bloke in Jersey who, after a couple of tinnies, had said, do you know what? I've had the AP and the Times on the phone. I'm now going to tell these blokes that, the story. And they didn't check it out, and it was too good to check, and they ran it. And guess what the real David Barkatz did? He went legal, and he sued. So as a result, they fired the editor of the Inquirer, they fired the people responsible for that story, and they elevated Dylan Howard. And then all of a sudden, Dylan Howard's looking for a deputy. So he comes to me and says, I want to revigorate the Inquirer. I want to take it back to chase big, national stories. It had broken the John Edwards story back in the day. I want to break the next big political scandal and the next big celebrity scandal that broken Tiger Woods, which is ironic looking back now because the
Tiger Woods' affair when he's smashing the...
Correct, back in on Thanksgiving. And it's ironic now looking back because the big political story was Trump and the other one was Weinstein, and those are the ones that they were catch and kills. And a catch and kill is purchasing a story off the market with the intention not to publish it to benefit someone.
And tabloids sometimes do pay for stories, right?
Correct. So in the British tabloid world, that is call for the pass.
What does that mean? Par for the course, you mean?
Yeah. See, I've already had one sip of this.
It's just the smell of the martini.
Just the fumes. Yeah. That's why you're here, just to kind of correct my grammatical slip-ups. And so American media did pay for stories, and a catch and kill is a practice that I felt deeply uncomfortable with. I wasn't familiar with it when I arrived there, and it was something that occurred. I think it was into the first year of my tenure there. Yeah. And the first year was the run-of-the-mill tabloid fare. It's Jen and Ben. It's a true crime yarn. It's not Pulitzer Prize-winning stuff, but there were yarns there that we broke that moved the needle. I broke the Hulk Hogan story. I broke the M-word rant that Hulk Hogan had talked about his daughter's partner, and that got him kicked out of the wrestling
didn't know that was you.
Hall of Fame. I broke that story. So there were impactful stories there, but there were also sort of the tabloid stuff. And it was kind of towards the end of that first year where I had a tip from a very good source of mine who calls me on a Sunday and says, Weinstein has been questioned over a groping allegation in Tribeca, and I can get you the girl. And that girl turned out to be Amber Badalano. And I immediately called Dylan Howard and I said, I've got a cracking yarn here. We've got a situation where Harvey Weinstein is being questioned over a groping allegation. And there were years of allegations in the background had swirled. No one could actually nail a story on this person. And I just remember Dylan just immediately saying, who's the source? And Dylan would always trust my sourcing. He'd always trust, I was his number two. And it's just something tweaked at me of why are you just immediately going to that question as opposed to how do we get this story across the line? And I was just like, just trust me on this. This is a bankable source. And he again wanted to know the source. And I was just like, just trust me on this. And it was the next day that the Daily News broke it.
We should say for the viewers as well that a journalist's source, especially for the news hounds, it's sacrosanct. You don't just share it with anyone. You might share it with the editor, but it's a very sacred relationship.
You keep it to your chest, and particularly this certain source, which was incredibly sensitive. And because of the Weinstein thing, I just didn't feel comfortable on a phone call just telling him that information. And the next day, after the Daily News had broke it, bearing in mind we hadn't written about it on Radar or covered it at all, he just came into my office and said, we need to offer her, I think it was a 5-figure amount for her story. And I was like, we had it. He had the scoop yesterday and we didn't need to pay her. And now you want to give her money to get her story. And I just remember thinking something's off with this whole thing. But I engaged the source and I said, hey, say to her if she does a full interview with us, gives us the exclusive, it's I think it was like $50K or something, and you'll get a finder's fee of $5K. And he just wrote back, he said, she doesn't want paying. And I was like, yeah, you're right, she doesn't want paying. I went to Howard and I said, she doesn't want to sell her story, mate. She wanted to get the story out. We had the story yesterday and you didn't want to buy it. And that slipped away. And then that Friday, that my old man had been sick that week. I'd spoken to him. I said, you need to go to a doctor, mate. You sound absolutely fucking terrible. And then, very Aussie male bloke type behavior. Oh, she'll be right. She'll be right.
This is what your dad was saying.
Yeah. And he sounded like death. Like he sounded like fucking death. And it was down the pub that Friday. I was pissed off because we had this big Weinstein scoop. I got scooped. Then Dylan Howard's acting like a maniac trying to buy this woman's story who doesn't want to sell the story. And then my mum calls and says, your dad did go to see a doctor and your dad is now in the Epworth in hospital. He's had some blood tests and they found a tumour. That tumour turned out to be stage 4 stomach cancer. And the next thing I knew, I was on a plane back to Australia. And within 10 days, he was gone.
So this is happening at the most intense moment of your
it was
journalism career.
Correct. And I just was in the room as he took his last breath. And we all were. We slept in that room. And at around 5 a.m., I think it was, on May the 1st, 2015, he took his last breath. And I was then, writing a eulogy. And I was then carrying my father's coffin into a grave at the Sorrento Cemetery. And you think about your parents' longevity, but I never really kind of contemplated what that would look like to lose a parent. And I'm very lucky to the News Gods Hamish in that February I was back for a friend's wedding and he was fit as a fiddle. We were talking about the next trips we were going to plan together. And I got to have that last chat with him when he was emaciated, when he barely could walk. And he just sat me down and he said, I just wanted 10 years in this house with your mother. They'd bought a place in South Yarra, they'd renovated it. Not even renovated, they built it, designed it, built it. And it was
South Yarra?
It's kind of inner Melbourne. He'd retired by this point. He'd worked his whole bollocks off to put us through school, and he was an accountant. And he just sat me down and he said, I just wanted 10 years in this house, and I got 4. And he had a temper, like I have a bit of a temper. And I expect him just to go off, to be like, how fucking unfair is this shit? How fucking cancer. And then he was just so calm, mate. And he just said, I wanted 10 years in this house with your mother and I got 4. But I've had a good run and it's time to go. And I think about that almost every day. And that has stuck with me through this whole period. And what
was it like to hear it at that particular moment in your life?
Because we'd had a very complicated relationship growing up. Sort of the old bull, young bull. I'm the oldest in the family. My younger brother came out quite early as gay. And my parents didn't react well to that. They became brought up in a Catholic household, and they, particularly my father, reacted incredibly poorly about it. And I remember being in London. I was living in London at the time, and they came to London, and I had this restaurant in Shoreditch booked on Curtin Road. I can remember the restaurant. And I was so excited to go to this restaurant, and it was a dim sum Asian fusion place, and I was really excited, and we ordered all this food, and I just asked my dad, like, how are you doing with Simon, my brother? And he said, it could be worse. We could have 2 of them. And he had no idea at that point that I was also gay. And so I just thought in the back of my head, I can't tell these people for quite some time. They're really struggling with this. And it would be a number of years later, actually when I was living in that apartment, we're coming full circle now, that I was living in a studio. I was basically living in a closet with my then partner, who was also in the closet, as was I.
Too many closets.
Too many closets going on. And he one day just took his stuff and went and texted me from LAX and said,
your partner?
My ex, and said, I love you, Lach, but I'm going back to Perth. I need to be with my mum. And my whole world fell apart because no one knew I was gay in New York. And I had stupidly gone along with not telling anyone. So I didn't have the support structure. And so I fell to bits. I couldn't do the job. I remember calling my mum in tears and just saying, I need to meet you somewhere. And she said, you sound fucking terrible. And I said, well, where can we meet? And she's like, well, let's figure out halfway. And it was either Hawaii, where they had their honeymoon, or Fiji. So we met in Fiji, and I get to Fiji, and by this point I hadn't really slept and was just a complete fucking mess.
Because of your relationship breakup.
Yeah. And I was just fucking heartbroken, and I just was like, I've got to rip the Band-Aid off with them straight away. And there's this Fijian ceremony. When you get to Fiji, they want to give you some special drink.
Kava?
That's the kava ceremony. Thank you. And I remember drinking this kava thing, and I was thinking, oh God, I feel even worse now.
Oh no, it's supposed to relax you.
And so I sit them down, and I just rip the Band-Aid off, and I say, I'm gay. And my dad just blurts out, you sure you're not bi? And my mum just grabs his hand and says, listen to your son. Almost thought I was going to break it. And
Good on your mum.
good on my mum. And he, on that entire trip in Fiji, we barely spoke. And I just thought, he is not coping that well with this. And that was around 2011. And they went back to Australia. Another year passed, and I spoke to him, but kind of off and on. And then mum reached out just out of the blue and said, you know, your dad's 70th is coming up. And I said, yeah. And she said, well, have you spoken to him about it? And I said, no, we haven't really spoken since Fiji. And she said, I think you should reach out to him. I think he might want to come to New York. And so I did. I sent him a message and I said, Dad, do you want to come to New York for your birthday? And
I'm going to bring you to this amazing bar.
Well, I don't know if I took him here, but I did take him to a lot of bars. And Mum said, Dad said, yeah. And he comes out, and I called in every favor. So Yankees tickets, Book of Mormon. Doing this column at the Daily News meant I had access to all of this stuff.
Cool, yeah.
And I got reservations at Le Cirque, when it was still around, and everything. And we just rolled around the city like teenagers. And it was the day he was leaving, and we were walking down just over here on Prince Street where the old McNally Jackson was. And we were walking back to the James Hotel because he had his flight that day. And he just stops me right where that church is over there. And he just says, this has been one of the best weeks of my life. And we're best mates now.
Oh, fuck.
And we hug, and he goes off and gets on that flight and goes back to Australia. And in a year, he was gone. And so I'm lucky to have had that moment with him, and I'm lucky to have had that kind of resolution of this. I think if he had have passed and I hadn't have told him who actually I was, there would have been a lot that I still would have been processing to this day. And it's still, to me, painful. It's 10 years, the 10-year anniversary was last year. But that was easily the most significant thing that's ever happened to me. But then I had to return here, and I had to then return to American media.
And return to this story that you're a midpoint living through. And I wonder, having had that experience with your dad and his passing and the suddenness of it and the state of mind he was in at the end there, how did it affect your sense of morality or mission in the work you're doing, and how did that inform then what would become of that experience at National Enquirer and your decision to basically become a source, to blow the whistle on those bad practices in that newspaper?
I mean, I came back and I was crying in the shower. I was a mess. I was going into my office at American Media and shutting the door and just couldn't fucking hold anything together. I just was a complete and utter fucking wreck. And as the news gods will bless you, sometimes they give us and they take us, Hamish, and then a bloke goes down an escalator, and that was Donald Trump, and that was 2015.
So the Weinstein stuff had happened.
That Weinstein thing had happened, and my father's death had happened, and by the time I get back, I'd forgotten about Amber. I'd forgotten about that Weinstein catch and kill. That tabloid organization I was just telling you about with Ben and Jan and the true crime and all that stuff. We then started, we're having news meetings, and we're now talking about Hillary's health.
You became the paper of Trump.
We became a propaganda arm for the Trump organization, for the Trump campaign.
And what gives you the confidence to say that so bold-facedly?
Well, I mean, you just need to look at the covers that went from, which are out there in the public. You can just find them. If a cursory Google search, you look at the covers during 2014 when I start there into 2015, up until that moment where that bloke goes down. And then you start to see the covers are like, Donald Trump, is the best man for president. Donald Trump's hidden secrets, and the hidden secrets is generous to charity, or it's Hillary 6 months to live, or it's these kind of. And it was we were in these editorial meetings, and I was like, what is going on in this place?
What was going on? Why was it an explicit propaganda arm for Trump?
I was questioning that every day at the time, and it started to become apparent to me that Pecker.
You need to explain who Pecker is.
Sorry, David Pecker, who was the owner, CEO of American Media. It became apparent at that point that he was friends with Trump. That was something I didn't know coming into American Media, but also it's not something you would know because we didn't think Trump was going to run for office. But this celebrity operation then overnight almost became a political machine that we're now publishing these stories that would never really see themselves on a supermarket checkout line.
And they're like, Trump's the greatest and Hillary's the worst.
It was Donald Trump exclusive rights for the Inquirer, and it wasn't him writing. It was a ghostwriter writing it, but it was this flavorable, flowery, promotional materials.
Yeah.
And then the mandate was we need to find stuff on the other candidates. And I'm running a team of reporters who are now running around the country looking for stuff on Ted Cruz or on...
Who was an opponent at the time.
Correct, all of the opponents. Then we have a tip from a doorman. Dino the doorman, it was his name. And he claimed that Donald Trump had a love child from an employee who was working with him. And so we mount a whole operation to stand the story up. So we have...
To see if it's true.
To see if it's true. So we have a stakeout going on, which basically means that a reporter and a photographer are sitting in a car trying to get pictures of said love child, and who was actually really a love adult because she was of adult age by this point. It was a while ago. It's a story. And we're also out the front of the woman's house, and we're trying to stand up the story. We bring Dino in for a polygraph, a lie detector test, which means he's strapped up and a polygrapher is asking him questions to see if he's lying. He passes his poly, but he's passing the stuff he's hearing secondhand from other people, security at the building. But while we're reporting the story out, the order comes down to stop reporting. And we pay Dino. We pay Dino not an insignificant fee, $30,000, which, back then we're paying people $500 for a tip, $1,000, $30K was a fair wad of cash. And we're paying him for a story, A, we don't even know if it's fucking true because we can't report anymore, and B, we're not even running. And that was the first catch and kill. And it was the first time I'd heard the term catch and kill because I'm in a meeting and a more old hand person says, this is a catch and kill. And I remember thinking, what the fuck is that term, catch and kill? I use Spike. And he said, this is a catch and kill. And that was the first time I'd heard that term.
So just to be explicit about it, the aim was to buy the story so it could not see the light of day.
Correct. So Dino's now signed up on an NDA. Dino's signed up on a contract, so he can't sell the story to anyone else. He can't tell anyone else about the story. And then a few months passed, and I remember Dylan saying to me, I've just been out in LA, and just an extraordinary story. I've met this woman, Karen McDougal, who alleges that she has an affair with Trump, and I think it's real. And I'm like, wow, great. Finally, we've got something going here. Like, finally, we've got a story here. Like, this is the presidential candidate. You're telling me he's had an affair with someone. This is exactly the type of yarn I came here to break. And I remember saying to him, okay, great. What do you need from me? When are we running it? Like, what? And he said, we're not. I said, what? He said, we're not. David Pecker has decided we've bought the story, 150K, and we're not running it. And I was thinking, what fucking world are we in? And that was the second catch and kill. And by that point, I'm now in bars, not dissimilar to this. I think might have been actually just here, where I'm whispering to friends late at night going, something's fucking going on here. We're not running these stories. We're running fucking these propaganda stories. And I think there's something in the background going on. And my mates would be like, you've just lost your dad. You need to cut this out and you need to fucking go to the gym.
Were you drinking a lot?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, as a coping mechanism. And friends would just say, this is a crazy conspiracy. You think that there's some kind of scheme or some kind of,
Oh, they doubted me. They doubted your story.
100%. They thought I was some crazy conspiracy theorist. And it would only be years later that we learnt the truth. But by this point, I'm thinking, okay, this bloke's not going to win. So let's just get through this fucking insanity that's going on. And it was on the eve of the election. I get a call from a Wall Street Journal reporter, Lucas Elpert. And he says to me, look, some blokes from the investigations desk have come across and they need help on a story. And do you know anything about this woman, Karen? And I said, Lucas, I need to call you back because Dylan Howard was almost from there where that monitor is. And I walked out of the building, I walked away from the building, I called Lucas back and I said, two things here. Firstly, I'm a ghost. I don't exist. You cannot tell your editors who I am. You have to just say you have someone in the building because I could lose my visa over this. That's what they have as leverage. Secondly, this was a catch and kill. And Lucas says, what's a catch and kill? And I go on to explain it. And I said that because that was an all-timer term, and I wanted the journal to use that term because it would give me cover. I go back up to my...
Why would it give you cover?
Because it's not a term I use. I would use Spike. The old-timers would use that term. And I thought if they run with that term, that's going to give me a little bit of protection here. I go back into my office, and I'm sweating, and just sitting there, and Dylan comes racing in, and they'd obviously gone for comment by that point, and he just says, fucking... and names two people who he suspects is the source, and says catch and kill in the fucking Wall Street Journal. Got this fucking story, and I'm like, oh shit, what story? And I leave. I go to one of my favorite little Japanese restaurants down in LaGuardia, and I just sit and I wait. And around 9 p.m. that night, the Journal published the story about a catch and kill payment to Karen McDougal. And in the fourth paragraph, they mention catch and kill. And for a long time, I was able to sort of, I guess,
stay in the shadows.
Stay in the shadows and have the cover. And I get out of there, but I signed a non-disclosure agreement. And that non-disclosure agreement was 13 pages.
So you left the company.
I left the company.
You signed an NDA on the
because I needed my visa. 13-page NDA, where the first clause was about, not the company, but David Pecker. And I thought to myself, I need to fucking figure out what the strategy is here because I'm tainted by this whole thing. And I need to figure out what my exit, my proper re-entry is after this exit.
Yeah, because you're going to have to reinvent your journalism career.
Correct, because I'm now staying by working for these people.
Yeah.
And I go off to, I had the best fucking couple of months of my life, Ibiza, Mykonos, like London, everything. I was just like, look, let's just have some time out of this mess.
Yeah.
And I come back to New York, and the Times break the Weinstein story wide open. Jodie Counter and Megan Twohey, and then Ronan, maybe Blue Eyes, follows up with the New Yorker piece.
Ronan Farrow.
And
his father is definitely not Frank Sinatra, just with
well, I think that's not
legal protection sake.
But I get a call from my attorney. So I'd engaged an employment attorney to negotiate this exit because I thought these fuckers will try and fuck me on the way out. They have my visa as leverage. They're using that to keep me quiet. But I need the visa to stay in the country to get the next gig. The lawyer calls and says, we have a problem. I said, why do we have a problem? He said, we've heard from the company. We have a letter here. We need to talk about it. And I thought to myself, this isn't good. Why are we getting letters when I've just left? And I go home and I read the letter, and the letter says, we understand Mr. Cartwright's broken his agreement. It's from their law firm. AMI's law firm. We understand Mr. Cartwright's broken his agreement on 3 occasions. We are preparing to litigate. And this will also involve the termination of this agreement, which will mean Mr. Cartwright will have to leave the country immediately. I went to the bathroom and repainted it, 50 Shades of Puke. It was a none so, it wasn't a none too unsubtle threat.
Definitely a threat, though.
Correct. And I remember the lawyer being like, what the fuck is this about? I said, this is about Harvey Weinstein. And he said, I thought all the shit was about Trump. I said, mate, I didn't have enough time on the way out to give you the whole fucking rundown of all the stuff that these people were doing. And the lawyer says, what are we going to do? And I say, we're not going to do anything. We're going to call the bluff. We're going to, it cost me fucking hundreds of dollars if you sign a letter, send a letter, but also this is to put the frighteners on me, to say nothing. And I remember feeling so angry that night, Hamish, that they were trying to do this to me and use the visa as leverage. And I woke up that next morning, I thought, fuck them. Fuck them. Like, if someone comes along and is a genuine operator, works for a reputable news organization, I will try and help. And several days later, Jim Rudenberg from the New York Times reached out and said, we're working on some stuff, and we're hearing that American media may have been doing stuff for Harvey Weinstein. And it was actually, this was one of the bars I think I met Jim at. The Botanica was the first one. And I sat down with him, and I was very nervous, and I just was like, I'm going to help guide you. You guys have to come to me with stuff, but I'll help tell you you're hot, you're cold, and I won't give over documents wholesale, but I'll help you. I'll help guide you. And I started becoming a source for the Times. I was also helping the Journal. Again, those guys came back on, and a couple other outlets to get these stories out in the bloodstream about these catch and kills. And I said to Jim at one point, mate, it wasn't just Harvey Weinstein. And he was like, okay. And I said, just have that in your back pocket. It wasn't just Harvey Weinstein. And he called me a few weeks later and he said, were they doing this also for Donald Trump? And then all these stories started to emerge about Stormy Daniels and Dina the Doorman and all of these other catch and kills. But I was getting more legal threats during this period over this NDA. They went on to threaten me with multi-million-dollar lawsuits. Thankfully, none of that came to fruition, but it was a fucking scary time.
Yeah, and you're like a solo operator in a way.
And I didn't have a job. And I was meeting with editors and they were saying to me, what the fuck were you doing working for fucking AMI? What were you doing with these catch and kills? And I remember sitting with John Avlon at the Daily Beast and I was just like, I was getting agitated because I was like, I can't tell him. I can't break the fucking thing with this person. I've just met him.
Yeah.
And I just said to him, John, how do you think you know about catch and kill?
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he got it. He was just like, oh. And they offered me a gig. It was really the only gig I was offered. I met with Ben Smith at BuzzFeed. I met with New York Magazine. People wouldn't even take meetings with me, you know. And I remember getting the Daily Beast and thinking, all right, Lachlan, the clock's ticking. You've got to fucking resuscitate your career now.
You must have been relieved at that moment.
I was fucking relieved to get an offer, not just to get a fucking offer, but to get a visa.
Yeah.
Because the visa clock was running down on my visa from AMI, and I had weeks to go on that clock. And I get to the Daily Beast, and I just work my fucking bollocks off, mate, to break big, consequential, impactful yarns, and to prove myself again in my 30s.
And for the American viewers, bollocks, to be clear, is testicles. So Lachlan no longer has those. So
can we do another round?
I wonder, like, as a child, you said your dad was an accountant. What did your mum do?
So dad was an accountant. Mum was a teacher. She was
cool.
a teacher, and she went on to then work at the Royal Children's Hospital, working with kids who had brain injuries through car crashes, and being sort of the liaison between the parents and the school and the hospital, and getting these kids back into to learning. And I didn't have any other journos in my family, but you know, from a very young age, Hamish, I just knew I wanted to be a fucking journo, and that was the only thing I ever wanted to do.
But why?
I think my parents always joked that every word that came out of my mouth was who, what, where, how, why. I just had this insatiable curiosity about the world and about how things work and how people operate. And I was that kid at the back of the tram going to school while all the other kids were talking about footy and the girls they screwed at the weekend. I'm reading the newspapers and I'm reading.
That's what the cool kids did.
And well, I don't know, they didn't look at me that way. and I hated high school.
Were you a nerd?
I went to a private. I don't know if I was a nerd because I wasn't that smart to be a nerd, but I wasn't a jock.
You're an outsider?
I was an outsider, and I still think I am an outsider. And I thought, I need to get to RMIT journalism, which was the preeminent journalism university in Australia, or one of them. And the requirements were you sat this JET, journalism entrance test. It happened on a Saturday. Hundreds of people sat it, I think almost 1,000 people. And it was about current affairs knowledge, and it was writing skills, and it was a whole test. And the results would come out in the papers. And so you'd have to wait for the newspaper to come. And so I went down to the newsagents that morning. It was a Monday morning to get the newspaper to find out if I got into this course. So I'd hedged everything on this, by the way. And I got the newspaper, and I thought, you fucking beauty, I'm in. I got it. And I went back to the Life-Saving Club, and I sat there and I called my mum, and she was in tears. And I was like, you fucking already knew, didn't you? And so she'd gone to the 7-Eleven the night before to get the papers when they first came out, her and
amazing.
Dad, and found out I got in. And that was really the real start of my
And they're like, you're set for life. You're entering the most lucrative profession.
Yeah, exactly. He's fine now. He'll never ask for anything. But no, that really was the start of this very slow climb that we now at, because that 3 years of journalism, it was very hands-on, and we were doing live TV, we were doing live radio, we were doing our own newspaper, but also I was in this incredible group of people, and it was an incredible time. And I then got a gig with Win Television in Ballarat. I was a TV reporter out of uni. I just remember thinking at the end of that year, what is the fucking trajectory here, Lachlan? Like, if you get to a metro market of 7 or 9, which were the big TV networks, you're going to do a year or two of general news, a year or two of crime, a year or two of state politics, and then you'll get to Canberra if you're lucky. And if you're really lucky and the news gods shine on you, you'll get a London or LA posting. And I thought to myself, I'm going to be fucking 30 by then. I was like, fuck that. I'm not waiting for that. I'm a young bloke in a hurry. And so I moved to London. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any contacts there. And this is where the news gods, they fuck with you sometimes. 3 days after I got there, the front page of The Guardian, BBC record job cuts, thousands to go. And I thought, I'm shit out of luck. I'm going to have to move back to Oz. And this is where sometimes the news gods do shine on you. Murdoch gave Uncle Roops gave a speech to a newspaper editor conference in DC. And he said, we've dropped the ball on online and we need to invest in digital. And I thought to myself, if this bloke is saying something, there must be something to it. So I sent my cover letter out to every national paper. I still have my rejection letter from Robert Thompson, who was running the Times at the time. But an editor at the Sun said, come in for a day. And that day led to, that shift led to a week. And that begins my rise up the Sun, where I become the first online news editor at 25. And that creates the pathway for me to come to New York.
So what other publications were you at as well?
So I come out here for the New York Post.
Yep.
I spend a number of years chasing stories all around the country.
So you went from the New York Post to the New York Daily News?
Correct. And then to American Media,
Yep.
which we've talked about.
Covered that bit.
And then the Daily Beast, where I resuscitate my career.
Yeah.
Short stint.
Which is where I encountered you for for the first
Correct.
time.
And short stint at THR, and then I
Hollywood
created
Reporter.
Breaker in.
Why the fuck did you do that? That's like, okay, so wait. You know what it's like to
Why
be...
the fuck did I do that? You were telling me for years to fucking
That's true,
strike
actually.
out on my
That
own
is
as an
true.
independent media.
Good point.
You were at me for fucking years, and
Yeah.
guess what? You were right.
Thank you.
At the
This
time,
interview's
I was
starting
like,
to
I
get good.
thought you were. I thought you were mental when you were like, you got to leave Legacy. You fucking,
Yeah.
what are you doing in Legacy?
Yeah.
And you were the bloke who kept saying, because you got to remember, the Daily Beast had a newsletter called Confider, which
Yeah.
turned out to be industry must read. And you kept saying, why the fuck are you doing this for these people?
Yeah.
Strike out on your own and start a Substack.
Yeah.
And you said that to me again when I went to THR,
Yeah.
which you were right. I should have just gone straight from the Daily Beast and struck out on my own.
Yeah.
But after THR, I thought I could go back into Legacy. I was freelancing at the time. I was writing for Vanity Fair and CGR and The Ankler, and I thought I could keep freelancing.
Yeah.
Or I could try and create something myself. And getting back to my late old man, R.I.P., Gary Gaza, he was...
You don't call your dad Gaza.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, that was his nickname.
You're
Gaza.
too- you're too
It's my middle
Australian.
name. Gary is my middle name.
Gary,
and,
yeah.
and so...
Did people call you Laza?
No, they don't.
I'm
Maybe
gonna-
they
I'm gonna
will
start
start
doing
after
that,
this. He was 41 when he started his business, and this was right around that same age, you know. And I thought, fuck it, like I'm entrepreneurial,
Yeah.
and so I thought, here is this opportunity to go off and do it.
Yeah.
And what's the worst thing that can happen? I could lose my life savings, but I
But
just
people
thought,
respect you more for having done it, even if it doesn't work
Yeah,
out.
the
which it
worst thing-
has worked out, but like you are actually improving your career prospects by being entrepreneurial in the first place, by showing you're willing to do something bold and taking on that risk.
I look, I think my history, as I've spoken about with you today, has been a series of punts, of gambles.
Yeah.
Moving to London at 22 and not knowing anyone,
Yeah.
but then, you know, nailing that got me
Figuring it out,
to New York.
yeah.
Going to American media, that was a fail. But it's been a series of punts, and most of them have paid off in a weird kind of way. And I think the news gods respect that if you do take a punt. And starting Breaker was a punt.
Yeah.
It's easily the best thing I've ever done. I'm working harder than I've ever done you know,
Yeah.
ever, 16, 18-hour days, 7 days a week.
Oof.
But I'm creating something that I know from the readers that I speak to and the subscribers that I interact with
Yeah.
is special.
Yeah.
Is something that if it's not out the gates, Hamish, by 8:30 p.m. on a Tuesday and Thursday, they're texting me, where is it?
Yeah.
What's going on with Breaker? And I'm like, I'm dealing with this flack, and just hold your horses.
You were starting this company with a partner.
Correct.
It didn't work out for whatever reasons. You don't need to go into it. And then he's gone off and done some other thing, and now you're on your own. What was that aspect of it like for you, like mentally?
Well, I mean, we have a business that wasn't growing, so that was problematic for obvious reasons. So I'm in a runway situation, mate. I'm trying to outgun myself. Think about it. I have a certain runway of money,
Yeah.
and if this business isn't growing,
Yeah.
I'm in a pickle here.
Yeah.
And that pickle is me fucking sleeping rough. And so things got very fucking real,
Yeah.
and we had to have a real conversation, and that conversation resulted in him going off in one direction and me having to think very carefully about how do I fucking propel this business forward. And I said to myself, well, I have to fucking resurrect this, and I have the fucking fall to do it.
Yeah.
And the clock is ticking. And I thought 3 things. 1, you have to put on a fucking killer event. 2, you have to relaunch the pod with a stellar lineup. And 3, you have to fucking break stories that are impactful and consequential.
Yeah.
If you do all 3, you're going to save this business. If you don't, we are fucked. And guess what? Fear is one hell of a motivator. And so I went about all 3. The second season of the Breaker Pod, we launched with Joe Scarborough. We had Tina Brown.
Yeah.
We had Janice Min. We had Jeff
Remnick.
Fager. We had David Remnick. We had a stellar lineup. We went from being in dive bars to 2-star Michelin restaurants.
I will credit Breaker Pod with part of the inspiration.
Yeah,
for
this does seem
setting
familiar,
for
this
show.
concept.
Yeah, so thank you.
I
Lachlan.
then broke a number of massive yarns, including breaking the Air Puck story, which was the deal that Puck was acquiring Airmail. I broke a Murdoch yarn that CNBC picked up.
Yeah.
I broke a number of stories, and I put on one hell of a fucking downtown media party that the New York Times came and covered and wrote a style section piece.
Yeah, and you're wearing this hat at it.
And
Can you
the
explain
Breaker
that? Can you explain the hat?
Fedora, the Breaker Fedora, which first premiered in upstate New York, staking out the Salzburger barbecue with the Great and the Good of the New York Times. guys coming in and out, me with a snapper. They hadn't seen anything like that. And the hat premiered that night and that day. And I'd always wanted to buy a hat from a hat shop, which is a hat shop in the village. I never had the opportunity. And I thought what would be fun is to buy an old school fedora, a press hat, and instead of the press card, wherever it is, put the Breaker business card in. And that's the sensibility of Breaker, that sense of fun as well as the scoops. And guess what?
And respect for old news traditions.
Correct. And that tabloid flair and that tabloid energy and that tabloid aggression paired with the standards of the broadsheets and the investigative nature of the broadsheets, and that paired together is Breaker. And that three-pronged approach saved the fucking business. Because that led to a wave of subscribers, it led to a wave of revenue, and it led to me getting to Christmas, Hamish, and thinking, we're good. You know, we are in a position where I think we're going to hit profitability by year one, and we were able to announce just the other week that Breaker is profitable.
Good shit,
and we were able to announce we have 40,000, more than 40,000 paying and free subscribers.
So total subscribers 40K here.
Correct. And mate, there was a time there I didn't think we were going to make it. There was a time there I'd wake up in the middle of the night and again repaint that bathroom 50 shades of puke. And so to be in a position where I could sit here in front of you and say I have a profitable business, I have a publication with a shit ton of subscribers.
40,000 invested readers.
Correct. And engaged readers who are saying, where the fuck is your newsletter? Now, this year is about building out the other lines of revenue.
So for the people who are building businesses like this, sometimes it looks...
Don't do it. Don't do a fucking startup.
It does look sexy from the outside and does seem easier than ever.
And I warn people, because I get calls from people in legacy media all the time, this must be a utopia, you don't have a boss. And I'm like, first off, I have more bosses than I've ever had. I have those 40,000 fucking subscribers. And secondly, I've never worked harder, and I've never been
You're working 7 days a week, you're saying?
Easily. You know, if there was
Sometimes
an 8th day,
8 days,
I'd be working that day too. But it's doing that fun, cheeky stuff, which is part of my DNA. And getting back to that mantra of Breaker, you tell the punters something they don't know, and you make them laugh at something they do know.
Yeah. What do you think your dad would think of you in this situation?
What the fuck have you done? No, actually, what have you fucking done now?
Good edit.
No, I do think what he would think, and he would get he'd get a kick out of it. Yeah, and the one thing that I wish he was around to see it.
Yeah.
And he went off every day at 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. to Greensboro, which was in Melbourne, where his accountancy business was. And he started his practice repping plumbers and tradies and ended it repping CEOs and footy stars. And I look at that as the trajectory of Breaker. You know, I'm starting off small and I have high hopes, but a lot of this is to him, is to his work ethic, is to just, I've had a good run. And I think that a lot, you know, and mate, I've had a fucking ripper run, and it's not time to go at all. It's fucking far from it. And I am fortunate to the news gods I got that last chat with him. It's inspiring to me to be able to think back to those last words that he gave me, which were, do something you love. Just go off and fucking do something you love. And I fucking love what I do every day. I meet the most amazing people. I get to tell the most amazing stories, and I'm very lucky.
Cheers, man.
Cheers, mate.
You're having a good run.
A lucky run.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Great to have been on. Thank you.